How do you react when the people you trust the most betray you? A friend, a partner, even your own family? Some betrayals cut so deep, they leave scars that never heal. And sometimes they end in blood. For most of her life, Margaret Thompson was seen as the perfect mother. At 53, she was well respected, known for her kindness, and deeply involved in her church and community. She had raised her only daughter, Emily Carter, 29, with love and devotion, always guiding her toward a happy and successful life. She took pride in being a pillar of strength for her family and those around her. No one ever questioned her intentions. Emily had it all. A beautiful home in a quiet Las Vegas suburb, 2 wonderful children, and a devoted husband, Jamal Reynolds, 32. Jamal was a hardworking construction manager, a man who had fought through hardships to build a life for his family. To outsiders, Emily and Jamal were the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, a storm was brewing, one that no one saw coming. For nearly a year, Margaret had been hiding a dark secret. She was sleeping with her daughter's husband. At first, it had been a fleeting lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness that neither of them could explain. But as time passed, the guilt that should have stopped them only seemed to fuel the thrill. The more dangerous it became, the harder it was to resist. It was an addiction, one that neither of them could break. And when Emily found out, their family was thrown into a nightmare of betrayal, rage, and ultimately murder. Margaret had always been a presence in Emily and Jamal's life. After Emily gave birth to their second child, Margaret moved closer to help with babysitting and household tasks. She played the role of the supportive mother and doting grandmother. But beneath the surface, something sinister was unfolding. Jamal, grateful for her support, often confided in her when he was stressed. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. She listened when Emily didn't. She understood him in ways Emily never had. And in those moments, an invisible line began to blur. At first, it was innocent. Margaret, having been a widow for 5 years, found herself drawn to Jamal's energy, his ambition, his charm. She had been lonely, and Jamal, whether he realized it or not, was giving her the attention she craved. She convinced herself it was harmless. After all, what was wrong with a little harmless admiration? One night, while Emily was working late, Margaret stayed over to help with the kids. After they went to bed, she and Jamal shared a bottle of wine. Laughter turned into lingering glances. One moment of vulnerability led to a kiss. That kiss led to something more. They swore it was a mistake. They promised it wouldn't happen again, but it did. Over the next few months, the affair escalated. Sneaking around, secret late-night calls, stolen moments of passion. The thrill of the forbidden only made it more intoxicating. The risk, the secrecy, the deception, it all became part of the rush. Jamal was torn. He loved Emily, but he couldn't deny the pull Margaret had over him. And Margaret? She had never felt so alive. She had spent years being the devoted mother, the perfect community figure. Now, she was doing something reckless, something selfish, and she loved it. But what's done in the dark always comes to light. It was only a matter of time before their perfect little world came crashing down. Trust is like glass. Once shattered, it can never be the same again. Emily Carter had always believed she had a solid foundation, built on love, loyalty, and family. But lately, something had shifted. Her mother, Margaret, had started dressing differently. Gone were the simple, modest blouses and plain skirts she usually wore. Instead, she wore stylish dresses, her makeup more pronounced, her hair freshly done every other day. She had even started using perfume, the kind meant to attract, not just to smell nice. And then there was Jamal. He was distracted, distant, always glued to his phone, always working late. His once warm embrace had become stiff, his kisses rushed, like an obligation rather than desire. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off her now barely touched her at all. At first, she told herself she was overthinking it. Marriage has rough patches. People change. Maybe he's just stressed. But then came the moment that shattered every illusion she had. It was a Sunday morning. She was doing a deep clean of their bedroom, while Jamal was out running errands with their kids. As she swept near the bed, something small and gold caught her eye. An earring. Not just any earring. Her mother's earring. Emily felt the air rush from her lungs. Her mother never misplaced jewelry. She was meticulous, careful with her belongings. So why was it under Emily's bed? A cold, sickening realization spread through her chest. It couldn't be. But once the seed of doubt was planted, she couldn't ignore it. Every little detail started making sense. The whispered conversations, the way Margaret always seemed to know when Jamal was home alone, the way they both acted so comfortable around each other. She needed proof. That night, while Jamal slept beside her, oblivious, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. The next morning, she put her plan into motion. She left the house as usual, pretending to go to work. But before she left, she placed a hidden security camera in the living room, carefully tucked between books on the shelf. It was connected to her phone, giving her a live feed. Then, she drove down the street and parked in an empty lot, her phone in her lap, watching the screen. Minutes passed. Then, Jamal appeared. He was pacing, checking his phone, running a hand down his face like he was anxious. Then, Margaret arrived. Emily's stomach twisted as she watched her mother walk into her home. Her home, with a smile on her face. She closed the door behind her and stepped closer to Jamal. Margaret placed a hand on his chest, leaned in, whispered something, and then they kissed. Emily's world collapsed, her vision blurred with rage, her fingers trembling so hard she almost dropped the phone. Her mother, her husband. It took everything in her not to storm inside, not to break down the door and scream. But she didn't. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and swallowed her pain. They had no idea she was watching. Let them believe they got away with it. She had a plan. Revenge isn't always planned. Sometimes it's a slow burn that explodes in an instant. The next evening, Emily set the stage. She called her mother and invited her over for dinner. Just a family night, she said, her voice steady. She even made Jamal's favorite meal, steak, roasted potatoes, red wine. Margaret arrived, smiling like nothing had happened. She kissed Emily on the cheek, sat at the table, and laughed with Jamal like everything was normal. Jamal, oblivious, ate his food, completely unaware that the woman sitting across from him knew his deepest, darkest secret. Emily played along, asking casual questions. "How was your day, Mom?" "Oh, the usual," Margaret said, sipping her wine. Emily smiled. "Oh, I bet." She turned to Jamal. "And you? Did you see anyone interesting today?" Jamal paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. No, just work." "Lies." Emily's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Then, without another word, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of the recording. Margaret's soft whispers, Jamal's low chuckle, and then the kiss. The unmistakable, gut-wrenching sound of betrayal. Jamal's fork clattered onto his plate. His face went pale. Margaret's smile vanished in an instant. Emily stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. The air was thick, suffocating. Her voice, when she spoke, was eerily calm. So, she placed her phone on the table, the video still playing. "How long has this been going on?" Jamal swallowed hard. "Emily, I shut up." Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Margaret reached out. "Emily, please. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how is it supposed to happen?" Emily snapped, her eyes burning with fury. "Were you going to tell me? Or just keep screwing my husband behind my back?" Margaret's face crumpled. "Sweetheart, I don't. Call me. Sweetheart." Jamal pushed back his chair, standing. "Baby, please, let's just talk." Emily saw red. Before she even realized what she was doing, she grabbed the steak knife from her plate and lunged forward. A scream, a gasp, a sharp, wet sound as the knife sank into flesh. Margaret staggered back, clutching her stomach, eyes wide with shock. Blood seeped between her fingers as she collapsed to her knees. Jamal bolted from his chair. "Emily, what the F?" Margaret's lips trembled. "Emily, please." but it was too late. Margaret collapsed onto the floor, her breath coming in weak, ragged gasps. Emily stood frozen, the knife still in her hand, her own breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The weight of what she had done crashed down on her. Jamal grabbed his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, Margaret was already gone. Emily didn't fight. She didn't run. She just stood there, staring at her mother's lifeless body, knowing that in that moment, her life was over too. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the quiet suburban street as Emily Carter stood frozen in her living room, her mother's blood still warm on her hands. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. Margaret Thompson was already gone. Jamal stood in the corner, pale and shaken, his phone still in his trembling hand after calling 911. Emily didn't resist when the officers grabbed her, pinned her arms behind her back, and slapped the cold handcuffs on her wrists. "Emily Carter, you're under arrest for the murder of Margaret Thompson." The words barely registered. The world around her blurred. She didn't fight. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at the lifeless body of the woman who had given her life and then betrayed it. As they dragged her toward the police car, neighbors peeked through their blinds, whispering, gossiping. Some gasped, some shook their heads. No one saw this coming. A mother, a daughter, a brutal end. The courtroom was packed. The case had gripped the entire community. People who had once admired Margaret for her kindness now saw her as something else. A woman who had committed the ultimate betrayal. The prosecution painted Emily as violent, unhinged, a woman who let her anger consume her. They played the 911 call, replayed the crime scene photos, forced the jury to stare at the bloody steak knife. But the defense told a different story. They argued that Emily wasn't a murderer. She was a woman pushed to her breaking point. A wife who had been betrayed. A daughter who had been destroyed. A mother who had lost everything in a single moment of blind rage. Psychologists testified about betrayal trauma, about how deep wounds can drive people to irrational actions. And the jury listened. After days of deliberation, they made their decision. Emily was convicted, but not of first-degree murder. Instead, she was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, a crime of passion. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison instead of life. Her reaction had been deadly, but in the eyes of the law, it wasn't cold-blooded. Despite his role in the affair, Jamal was never charged with a crime, but he didn't walk away unscathed. The community turned on him. The men who had once shared drinks with him at barbecues now ignored him. His coworkers whispered behind his back, calling him a disgrace. Even people at church, where Margaret had been a respected member, refused to look him in the eye. One by one, he lost everything. His job, his friends, his reputation. He couldn't even walk into a grocery store without hearing hushed voices, without feeling the weight of the judgment in people's eyes. Eventually, he packed up and left. He took the children and moved to another state, hoping to escape the shadow of what had happened. But no matter where he went, he would always be the man whose affair had destroyed everything. Margaret Thompson was buried in the same town where she had spent her life. But the headstone that marked her grave didn't tell the full story. To some, she was still the devoted mother, the kind-hearted woman who had been active in her community. But to others, she was the woman whose darkest secret led to her own bloody end. A mother, a betrayer, a victim. She was remembered not for the life she lived, but for the scandal that ended it. Some betrayals are deadly. Would you have reacted the same way as Emily? Or was this murder never justified? Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories.